Welcome everybody to the Lenfest Center for the Arts and to tonight's long-anticipated event, the first ever reading in the Max Ritvo Poetry Series. I'm Timothy Donnelly, the director of poetry at the writing program of the School of the Arts, and on behalf of all of the above, I thank you for being here. It's our honor tonight to be presenting Brenda Hillman, one of the most cherished poets of our time. Hillman is a poet overspilling with wildness and with wisdom, full of commitments and compassions, dedicated to arcana as well as to the common kind. She is a poet wholly of our planet and in the interest of our planet, but one whose mind has access to perspectives far vaster than the human and infinitely smaller too. One recent poem empathizes deeply with chemolitho-autotrophic bacteria, while another, from some time ago, begins, "Once you were immortal in the flame. You were not the fire, but you were in the fire." Another starts, "In the corner of the heart, reserved for action, a pig is eating the poppies of hell." Hillman knows from all kinds of fire. She brings it, and we trust it in her hands. She is an activist, she is an Aries, and she is also, just in case it isn't clear, a mystic. But a mystic, she adds, in a practical way. The two poems I just quoted are in Hillman's 1997 collection, Loose Sugar, and I remember hearing her read from that book when it was still in manuscript at a reading she gave with her husband, the poet Robert Hass, at the Diaz Center for the Arts in Chelsea way back in 1995. I was a child at the time, accustomed mostly to the works of Keats, and hadn't yet been to many public gatherings. The hall seemed very crowded to me and frightening, but through it all I heard a voice born among the cacti of Tucson, say, "Hawking says there are two kinds of time, real and imaginary. Imaginary time must be like decaf." I looked around the room. What was happening exactly? I felt like I was falling through the mists of Neptune and into my grandmother's lemon yellow kitchen. I was into it, you could say, and I was changed. I lent Loose Sugar to Max back in 2015, a full 20 years after my experience, knowing he would fall in love with it as I had, and moreover, that he would feel companioned by it while finishing work on the poems that he collected in his first book, 4 Reincarnations. And that's what happened. He loved Loose Sugar and Hillman's work immediately. Her spirit, her weirdness, her beauty, her politics, her practical mysticism, her everything. As Dorothy Alasky, with whom Hillman shares a birthday, no small coincidence, would say, "That's Aries Sag." And so it's only fitting, I think, that we start this series just this way. I say this is the first reading in the Max Ritvo Poetry Series, although we did hold an inaugural event here at the Lenfest back in October 2017 to celebrate a generous gift from the Slivka Foundation. The gift was orchestrated by Ari Ritvo, Max's mom, in remembrance of Max and of the years he spent among us here at Columbia. Thank you, Ari, wherever you may be. With this gift, we are able not only to host this annual event, but also to provide 2 of the writing program's poetry students with Max Ritvo fellowships. Both Ritvo fellows will be participating in this evening's undertakings. In a moment, Claire Doherty of Stockton, California will kick things off with a poem from Max's second book, The Final Voicemails, after which Allison Carter of Calgary, Alberta will provide a proper introduction to Brenda Hillman, who will then read from her work. After the reading, we have another something special planned. At the end of our event 2 Octobers ago, we made use of this big screen behind me to exhibit an extraordinary animation of Max Ritvo's poem called Poem to My Litter. You should all take a look at it if you haven't seen it already. Its animator, the extremely talented Nate Milton, is here with us tonight for the debut of a new animation, this time of a poem of Hillman's exceptional and most recent book, Extra Hidden Life Among the Days. I'm very excited to be showing this to you tonight. This animation was made possible by the Max Ritvo Memorial Fund, which is separate from the endowment, and we hope to make this an annual tradition. So if you can, please consider making a contribution to the fund, and my gratitude goes to those who have already done so. Information on how to give to the Max Ritvo Memorial Fund is available in your program. After the animation, our poet will be happy to answer a few questions from the audience, and she will also be happy to sign books as well, which will be available for purchase with thanks to Book Culture. Almost lastly, I'm sorry this is so long, on behalf of the School of the Arts team, I want to thank the Society of Fellows and the Heyman Center for the Humanities for their co-sponsorship of this event, and also to Wesleyan University Press for the use of Hillman's work, and also to Nate Milton for the beautiful place he went with it, and yet again to Ari Ritvo for everything she has made possible. Truly, lastly, I want to acknowledge that this has been a difficult week for our community as it marks the 1-year anniversary of the loss of Laura Montebello, one of our graduate students, as well as of Lucy Brock-Broido, Director of Poetry at Columbia for 25 years and an irreplaceable mentor to hundreds. Many of you will have last seen Lucy right here at this lectern back in October, the October I can't stop referring to. They should both be with us, as should Max himself. My thanks to Brenda Hillman for being a source of light for us right now, as ever, but especially. And let's keep them with us in our hearts, likewise in that corner reserved for action, and outwardly in the glow of this image of the bark of a Great Basin bristlecone pine, a species known to persist through all kinds of adversity, extremes of temperature and drought, and known also for its astounding longevity. One specimen in California's White Mountains is estimated to be 5,065 years old, meaning it was already about 50 years old around the time the construction of Stonehenge began. So this is a house of worship. Thanks again for being here, and please welcome Claire Doherty.
From the final voicemails. Your next date alone. The stage is empty. How do you fill it? With music. The words will be the play, and the tune will be the body, carrying the words, shaking with tears. The towel torn, so what he'd like hidden is exposed, where his flesh is like a bruised heart. If you wish to see me, you'll have to sing. I will soon have none of the ways earth plays along with the soul. No grass, no wind. Please welcome Allison Carter.
Thank you, Claire and Tim and all of you for coming tonight. I am so honored to be here to help introduce you to Professor Brenda Hillman. There's a short excerpt from her most recent book, Extra Hidden Life Among the Days. It's from the poem Day 13, which is part of a series of journal entries. These few lines start with a word that I can only give the shape of. A photo of a branch lavish with lichen, genus Lecanora, growing celadon green and spangled with characteristic apothecia. The branch has been photographed laying on a copy of the poem into which it would be written. I haven't yet begun, and already we are all tilting through a page of Brenda Hillman's. I'm treating this image embedded into the poem as a word because so much of her poetry is about languages written into and of the earth, about the verse in wood as much as the verse on paper. It registers as life forms, Lecanora with its creamy apothecia growing like baby epics on a branch, and this is what it will be like in what we want to call the stateless world. And when we dream, it stays with us. It stays with us. It stays for all who sit in the dusk with poetry, loving the world. That excerpt captures so much about what I love in Professor Hillman's poetry. Her forms are masterful and innovative, lacing lacuna into poem's fabric from which linguistic, conceptual, and temporal fibers may knit and pearl. You will all have to abide me mixing my metaphors tonight. I will try to keep them straight, but this is living, quilting, relativistic poetry we're talking about. If you're at all familiar with her work, you too have been helixed into a page, stitched through preceding or receding em-dash, that punctuative needle piercing, diving through paper meniscus that seems altogether either too mercurial or too flammable to hold whatever is brimming beneath. When the needle resurfaces, it comes back pulling colored threads, the ecological, Gnostic, political, and literary roving and raveling through the page transverse. These filaments braid and weave vital estuaries, rivers and scarves of grief, history, naturalism, and love, all held by and holding poetry. Her work is often described as interdisciplinary, and while I generally agree with that sentiment, I hesitate to ascribe any betweenness to her poetry. It is not liminal or placeless, not borrowing, it stands in its own vibration. Rather, it is elemental, rigorous, magnetic, and mystical. It embraces the microscopic and the macroscopic, archaea, lichen, Cool Whip, a lock of Sylvia Plath's hair, Ovid, healthcare reform, dunes, seas, and galaxies. It portages between temporal pools that don't feel as though they should be so adroitly joined. Yesterday, and the birth of stars, Dante's hell, stateless Gnostic futures, and Adam's transit, this protest right now. Interdisciplinary, perhaps, but in the most alchemical sense. The core of alchemy is transformation, plurality, and instability. The possibility of change and decay are held in tension with that which remains or seems immutable, outside time. Indeed, writing and language writ large are fundamentally alchemical challenges, something changing state. Neither alchemy nor its ilk of translational mysteries is alien to Professor Hillman's work. The 4 books preceding this one comprised a sensational alchemical tetralogy in which each successive book held a classical element, earth, air, water, and fire. The last of these seasonal works with letters on fire won the International Griffin Poetry Prize in 2014. From that book, in a poem called Geminid Showers and Healthcare Reform, there are these lines. Here meaning met material that is, inside the personal, that is for love of earth. This is the last thread I want to follow. It will bring us right back to the beginning. Throughout Extra Hidden Life Among the Days, small photos of loved ones, cacti, protest, canopy, and spores are woven into the syntax. They open temporal islets into otherworldly moments of the poem, stretching the phrase of the word to everywhere behind it. And we're tilting through pages again. Professor Hillman's poetry, especially in this most recent book's experiments, nourishes that which resists language. I think this is why some of the most phenomenal elegies emerge out of her books. As in the case of the Death Tractates, which is one of my favorites, they arrived with such ferocity that they necessitated their own shape. In all cases, Brenda does more than write these poems. She gives space for their writing to happen and listens for the language they bring. She carves a syntactical and poetic form for that which is within and without, and you can feel it. Just like the jewel-toned, tree-eating beetles that make several appearances in this new book, there is a palpable path for the letters not in English, for the non-human word. Through the page of Professor Hillman's poetry, not just atop it. A path for threads transformed by the weeding, for estuaries, certainly by the beetles who will eat the tree's first poem. As she writes in Loose Sugar, crickets in books, a muffled excellence. Professor Hillman is the author of 10 books of poetry, including Loose Sugar, seasonal works with Letters on Fire, and this most recent, Extra Hidden Life Among the Days. In addition to these and 3 chapbooks, she is also an editor and translator, and has been awarded the Griffin Poetry Prize, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the William Carlos Williams Prize, a pushcart, and fellowships from the NEA, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Academy of American Poets. In recent years, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and to the position of Chancellor of the Academy of the American Poets. She currently holds the Olivia Filippi Chair in Poetry at St. Mary's College. Please join me in welcoming Professor Brenda Hillman.
Thank you, Allison. That was a beautiful intro, and thank you, Claire, for reading that wonderful poem, and thank you, Timothy, and to the whole program for inviting me. I'm going to get some water first. So, thank you so much for coming. I know many demands on your time in this great city. I'm going to kind of give a wildly across the tones sort of reading that'll cover some ground. I'll start with a new poem. On days when we both travel, everything is so stressful. Was it always like this? Air full of the bitter flecks from the fires, friends in despair over violence and money, for many a feeling of being unhinged, or if not unhinged, one screw taken out of the door. You got up and left before dawn, taking a frayed black bag. I left soon after that, afraid, going the opposite way. Daily, this curtain between death and life. Then Kay's baby is born just north of here. Now the 4-part call of the crow snags gravity from stars that crashed millions of years back. The 4 floats in my blood like a broken chair in the flood. On the plain, I read the work of friends on earth. Abstract, intimate, grounded, or rough, difficult, delved, simple, or winged. Sometimes poetry can't do enough, and sometimes poetry can do enough. Extra Hidden Life Among the Days for C.D. Wright. Sometimes when I'm very tired, I think of extremophiles, chemolitho autotrophs, and others with power for changing not life into lives, of those that eat rock and fire in volcanoes before the death of the world, but after the death of a human, of their taste for ammonia or iron, sulfur and carbon, somehow enough of it to go on. As workers taste revolt, they grow at the vents of oceans, turning mute vapor into respiration, changing unhinged matter to hinges near the rims of sea trenches or the caves. Our friend wrote of writers living in gray hiding, of those who love glass and early freedom, steep sand and late freedom, sex among gentle or bitter grasses, those with a taste for blue or belligerence, obscure lives she called them, the writers of radical mind. The living prefer life. Mostly they do. They are ravenous, making shapes in groups as the dying grow one thought until the end, wanting more specifics, desert or delay, until the I drops away into I am not here. The mineral other pumps and vast vapors, ridges and shadows, beyond the single life it had not thought of. Started that poem before C.D. died and then finished it after she died. This is sort of an ars poetica for poetry of a certain kind. The bride tree can't be read. The bride tree puts down its roots below the phyla. It is there when we die and when we are born, middle and upper branches reaching the planet heart by the billions during a revolution we don't see. Quarks and leptons are cooling on their infant stems. Spinning, the spinning brain of matter, fled to electrical dark water, species with names the tree can hold in the shale shade brought by the ambulance of art. No one but you knows what occurred in the dress you wore in the dream of atonement. The displaced tree in the dream you wore, a suffering endurable only once, edges that sought release from envy to a more endurable loss, a form to be walked past, that has outworn the shame of time, its colors sprung through description. Above a blaze of rhizomes spreading in an arable mat that mostly isn't simple but is calm and free. This one is in your program, the little thing that they made. And thanks to Gavin and to everyone who puts together such a series. I saw the flyer, so many steps involved in that, so thanks for all your work. So this is in your flyer. On a Day in the World, it's the first poem in this book. We had a grief we didn't understand while standing at the edge of some low scrub hills, as if humans were extra or already gone. What had been in us before? A life that asked for mostly wanting freedom to get things done in order to feel less helpless about the end of things alone. When I think of time on Earth, I feel the angle of gray minutes entering the medium days, not yet built up. Our work together, groups, the willing burden of an old belief, and beyond them, love, as of a great life going like fast creatures, peeling back marked seeds, gold-brown integuments, the color time will be when we are gone. The whole first section of this is sort of, so I'm glad to see my friend the bristlecone, one of the ancient, most ancient trees on Earth. And the whole first section of this book kind of started with the idea, and someone said to me after I'd finished the Four Elements books, that was about a 2-decade project, and I've started hating the word project, by the way, so forget I said that. But the idea that there was another element is very common in many cultures, and a Korean friend told me, oh, our fifth element is wood, so you need to write a wood book. So that's some of what inspired this first section. Angrily standing outside in the wind, kept losing self-control, but how could one lose the self after reading so much literary theory? The shorter I stood under the cork trees, the taller I remained rather passive. The Brendas were angry at the greed, angry that the trees would die, had lost interest in the posturing of the privileged, the gaps between can't and won't. Stood outside the gate of permissible sound, and the wind came soughing through the doubt debris. Soughing comes from swag, to resound. Echo actually comes from this also. We thought of old Hegel across the sea, the Weltgeist, and clouds went by like the bones of a Kleenex. It's too late for countries, but it's not too late for trees, and the wind kept soughing with its sound sash, wind with its sound sash, increasing bold, wind with its sound sash, increasing bold. That reminds me that our granddaughter, she's at University of British Columbia, and she's changed from a very practical major of nutrition to philosophy. She called and left a message on Bob's voicemail saying, "Pop-up, we just have to talk about Hegel." So I thought, oh, well, we've sort of succeeded. You get a voicemail like that, you think, well, there. She's really... Okay, I'm going to read 2 poems that are sort of inspired. They're prose poems with little bits of verse. And I do a lot of, I call it now crypto-animism because I think that making up your own actions and then taking consciousness of other things out into the world, even if your action is not going to succeed. I was trying to work with the Democratic Party for a long time and then sort of gave up on that. But the idea that you can make up an action and then just go do it. So I'm just concluding 15 years of standing outside at my lunch hour with some students and faculty and staff, just holding signs on my campus. Crypto-animist introvert activism. Every week, for about a decade, some of us at school have been standing at lunch hour to protest drones, racism, state killing, the death of species, and so on. We stand under a live oak while people walk by on their way to lunch. We hold up signs. It's an absurd situation and it changes nothing. Sometimes the good Dr. Ali brings a boombox with Bob Marley and we dance ineptly on the pavement. The changes fall together. Positive and negative fall together as Bob Marley sustains us near the tree. Cesar Vallejo dances as a flea on the back of a squirrel. Blake and Baraka dance as lithophilic microbes inside the rock. We have no proof that they don't. The science moths dance in the live oak and go about their work of being powdery. The protest is absurd, but I admire these forms of absurdity. When the revolution comes, the polite white mothers in the Moraga Safeway will still be shopping for sugary cereal and barbecue sauce. When the time comes, some will rise and some will dance and some will lay our bodies down. Triple moments of light in industry. So we have at the edge of Contra Costa County many oil refineries. During our protest at the refineries, our friend R tells us there are bugs in the oil, in the earth-colored vats at Valero and Shell. Tiny slave bacteria changing sulfides, ammonia, hydrocarbons, and phenol into levels of toxin the mixture can tolerate. And then we consider how early tired stars gave way to carbon molecules a short time after the start of time, and now carbon makes its way in all life as the present tense makes its way in poetry. The sludge in the vats where the hydrocarbonoclastic bacteria break things down to unending necessities, of which Dante writes, of the middle of hell, light where no light is. R says his friend who tends the bugs for the company feels tenderly toward his mini sludge eaters. They are his animals. He takes their temperature and stirs them, and so on. We pause to think of it. Such small creatures. At the beginning of life, the cells were anaerobic, ocean vents of fire, archaea, then they loved air. At the axis of time, there are triple moments when you look back, forward, or in. As a child, you were asked to perform more than you could manage. Your need was not symmetrical. It is impossible to repay the laborers who work so hard. R describes his friend's work as devotional. The bacteria do not experience hurt or the void, but their service is uneven, and that is why I protest. I went from thinking that such protests or such demonstrations of resistance or something like that had to have a purpose, and I don't anymore. I think that it's just important to register resistance of kinds. And so I'll read 3 poems. This from the series that Allison was writing about. This daybook series, I was inspired by Robert Creeley and Giovanni Singleton and others who have written daybooks in kind of an order. And I just took notes in my journal after Ferguson and, years after Occupy. And I was just feeling, so I just started writing in my journal and then making poems out of it. I was reading Rosa Luxemburg's letters, and I was thinking about violence and nonviolence and sort of how to commit yourself to a practice that will preclude harming others, which Rosa Luxemburg did not commit to that. And I have a trance practice. It's a hypnotherapy practice, and I write a lot out of that. And there's a character in my trance practice called the wife of decomposers. So she appears. She has different colored skin. It's always changing color. Day 3. A metaphor exists in your place. Thinking of Rosa and Rosa on the tiny plane, flying over Ferguson, the Midwest generalizing bumpy clouds, iPad, I nausea, I vomit, the white woman throwing up in seat 9A into the paper bag. A metaphor exists in motion. No one could help her as she vomited. We all just sat there helpless. My wife of decomposers has brown skin. She visits me among the forms. Lycan says, accept what is, then break it down. I sought my soul among the books, and he was reading. In summers beside they abide. They sit in yards and rooms listening to words. They smoke hand-rolled organic weeds, wildly gesturing. They take the grief smoke into their bodies. The revolution isn't coming very fast. They breathe. Here are the durable goods online, our phones made by slaves, our satchels made of soft cow. During the Can't Stand It, How to Live, skin in the yards, life forms, species on stucco and bark, lobes on fences like old sentences, shield and speckled, breaking down progress, breaking down hulls of ships at port, near tiny foxes in the woods, passing through the organisms, breaking things down, flavopunctilia in the lacerated dusk, oh, worlds that are and aren't, that is and isn't a metaphor. Day 4. In the afternoon of our unknowing, we were outside. So were other organisms, flies, dust, punctuation. It's impossible to know how to live. Rilke, paralyzed, depressed, wrote little during World War I. Claude McKay, Jamaican songs in dialect. In letters, Rosa writes, my gold, the workers' strike. The Tsar's children had diamonds sewn into their clothes. My lichen figure has orange skin. She breaks things down in thickets near the walls. Sunburst form with even oranger ears, living bravely when the air is bad. Yes, of course, yes. Walmart doing violence to the poor who work and shop at Walmart. How now, brown cow, they cannot live. Dream baby. The crowds were in the streets again in groups. We had a brief window to join in. Black and brown and white students, middle-income adults, whatever that means. In our case, teachers with jobs. No rich were in the street. No angry Lloyd Blankfein from Goldman Sachs in the streets after poor people lose housing. How can he even look at himself in a window? Who if they cried out? Now in the oaks nearby, secret life is growing, life forms. Xantho Mendoza growing real gold radar ears. A simile grows like the skin of the soul if it were safe to go outside and live. Day 6. In the aftermath of the overwhelm, we hope to stay awake. Oxalis tries to stay awake, living in the smalls. Friends, when you were low as children, which punctuation did you love? It tried to help you along as Lycan reads the stone, as Rosa rides the bus, as Rosa rides the train. Microsoft doesn't want to paste the Polish Z in Garamond, and they say Bill Gates has 36 bedrooms. Rosa looking at the sky out the jail cell, vision released, to human suffer so far back beside, outside the drought. Ruffle lichen spreads a tasty dark beneath the tree, white lobes with a larger lobe, and Ceredia looking like ridges of cocaine when we were bored and didn't know oblivion is another thing Big Pharma owns. A simile besides. As a child, I thought I could love everyone, and now I can't. Can't love George Zimmerman, Darren Wilson, Netanyahu. Tech support tells me she hopes this app will give our family a newfound freedom, and I am a twin. The other voices are invisible. Algae and fungi, twinned with lobes and 6.2 millimeters wide and long cilia, fairly common on bark in the cortex, K plus yellow medulla, PD plus K, to escape the nothing. I love it when young poets read outside, bringing 20 styles of natural into line. My brother's train set had a clump of plastic lichen representing nature, a world that dreams beside, as when a poet reads outside a dappled afternoon, her voice like someone leaving Eden, in a syntax of 3 smalls, no binaries, no false praise or bullshit. So this is the 30th year since I wrote Death Tractates, which got 0 attention at the time. Like, I think not even, maybe, I think it got 1 review. And then mostly it became kind of a book that people passed around during the AIDS crisis, I think. So I'm going to read first tractate, just kind of just the anniversary of that book. My friend died 30 years ago last month. First tractate. And a tractate is just like an essay. That the soul got to choose. Nothing else got to, but the soul got to choose. That it was very clever, stepping from light world to light world as an egret fishes through its smeared reflections, through its deaths, for it believed in the one life that it would last forever. When she had just started being dead, I called to her. Plum trees were waiting to be entered the swirling way they have, each a shower of what? Each one full of hope and of the repetitions. When she'd been dead a while, I called again. I thought she was superior somehow because she had become invisible, because she'd become subtle among the shapes, and at first she didn't answer. Everything answered. Tell now, red-tailed hawk, for we've heard the smallest thing cry out beneath you. Have you seen her, red hawk, thrush walking up the ragged middle? Have you seen her, mockingbird with your trills and scallops, with your second mouth in your throat of all things? Tell us, where is she whom we love? I closed my eyes and saw the early spring, pretty spring, kind of a reward. I opened them and saw the swirling world, thousands of qualified pinks, deer feeding on the torn changes, and I wanted to go back from whence I came. Up the coast, along the sandbanks and spillways, they argued about bays. Spring came forth with its this and that, its I can't decide, as my life had before she died, pre-blossoming, cranesbill, poppy, and I wanted to go back from whence I came. Heart that can still see our heart, heart that will not let us rest. February evening, young mothers in the drugstore with valentines, all of which needed to be used, packages of plain or lace ones stuck together, and the mothers proud of themselves for remembering. The valentines slumped down so the red merely looked promising, but pressing up bravely anyhow, the awkwardness of what's here, ceaselessly trying to arrange itself. I went out in the night, I called out, I felt along the edges of the panel. Without her, everything seemed strange to me in this world, just the taste of oranges, imagine. And all of this compared to her seemed bulky. For weeks this was true, as if only being dead were the right amount. Only being dead were fragile enough for what the earth had to say. Clumsy, for a while clumsy. For a while it was too much to go on living. Roadside acacias, I could not bear them, all unzipped, like meaning. The ostinatos of the birds, magnolias, dogs' tongues, curved to spoon up rain, too much shape. Even that which was only suspected of having it, the iris that lay in the ground with their eyes of fate. And then the other voice said, you who long for things, who can't understand borders, who like to spread your magic and your blame, forgive yourself. She'd given you an impossible task. She said to follow, and you intended to, but you'd come to a place in the forest where there weren't any tracks. So I'm going to read the piece that's going to be in the animation that you'll see, and then a translation and a paragraph and a couple poems from a series, and then I'll be done. So this is called Species Prepare to Exist After Money. Turns out bacteria communicate in color. They warn each other in teal or celadon, and humans assign meaning to this, saying they are distressed or full of longing. The wood rat makes a nest of H's. It hoards the 7 tiny silences. Crows in the pine can count specific faces like writers who feel their art has been ignored. My father spent his life thinking about money, though he knew it causes most of this stupid violence, and he thought of me as a sensible person. You have the chemical for sensible, he said. There was no tragedy between us, unlike how poor Joyce wrote that his daughter turned away from that battered cabman's face the world. I didn't turn away because I don't know where it is. It is all over. And when it seems pure nothingness has come to pass, I know another animal prepares itself, nationless, not sensible. Thinking of it helps a little bit. So I'll read a very short translation. So this book by Ana Cristina Cesar, At Your Feet. So my mother is born in Brazil, and her first language was Portuguese, and she was having a little bit of a difficult time after my dad had some heart surgery. And so I looked around for a project to do with her. And I do not have much Portuguese. My Portuguese is really baby. So if you are a Portuguese speaker, you will hear it murdered. But I knew enough to help her transliterate. And then after we had a transliteration, I turned it into some poetry. And then we got some real experts, a native speaker who's doing his PhD, and then a wonderful Sebastião Edson Macedo and Katrina Dodson helped us kind of finish the book. Let's see, maybe in the interest of time, I'll read a very short one. Noite Carioca. Diálogo de surdos, não amistoso no frio, atravanco na contramão, suspiros no contrafluxo. Te apresento a mulher mais discreta do mundo, essa que não tem nenhum segredo. Carioca night. Dialogue of the deaf. No, friendly in the cold. I go against traffic, sighing against the flow. I present to you the most discreet woman in the world, the one who has no secrets. But I do, look this up. It's published by Parlor Press, and she is like a rock star in Brazil, but her work was relatively unknown until the family had some kind of issues about having her work. So I'm going to read a paragraph to you all, and then a few more poems, and that'll be it. This paragraph was a poet named Lisa Wells was putting together a blog for Poetry Magazine, and I thought since the room was probably full of writers, that this would be a good thing to read. So she put this at the end of her blog that she was doing on. She asked me to write a letter to emerging poets, like give some wise words. I don't have wise words. Anyway, I put this paragraph together, and so it's at the end of her blog and the Poetry Foundation website. Dear emerging, pre-emerging, and post-emerging poets, Lisa has asked me to write you a note in case you are feeling discouraged about some public aspects of poetry. It's hard not to be discouraged when there is so much ignorance helplessly displayed toward our art. It is not surprising that you feel overly sensitive when poetry or your poetry is ignored. Books of poetry are left off best of lists. They are rarely reviewed in major venues, and when they are mentioned, it might be only for some perceived aspect of marketable content. Try to get past this. You are bringing your rare imagination and your love of language to the culture that needs those things. Poetry is not a specialized field. It has universal and eternal value. It is something most people start writing when they are children. It is what humans read to each other at weddings and funerals. It takes us into vast spiritual adventures. It enacts original dreams. You do not need to dumb down your art or ignore a century of modernist practice to please what is sometimes called a larger audience. It is not a poet's job to simplify the mystery of existence or its lexicon. Is the life of the soul ever easy? When you feel downcast, keep in mind those who have encouraged you along the way and write for them. Imagine a stranger who may be reading one of your poems in secret someday. Try not to think about people who are writing facile things on the internet. Remember the radical ancestor poets who have gone before, especially those who received less acknowledgement than they should have, those whose genius was insufficiently recognized. Their poetry provides excellent company, as does the work of great living poets who offer inspiration and consolation. Read across aesthetic lines and identity groups, assembling a varied canon. When you feel paralyzed by the pointlessness of temporary fashion, or when dull or predictable work is lauded, try new things that will surprise you as you work for the joy of the process, remembering that all a writer needs are 4 true readers, and one of them can be a tree. Never look at your phone when walking downstairs. Do not destroy your body by self-medicating under poetic stress. Just write new poems and read them to your community. Keep the ego in balance, because the ego project is doomed to fail. If you don't receive the rewards you deserve from the outside world, and you probably won't, try to celebrate the good work of others. Hold love in your heart, work for justice for humans and non-humans, and keep writing. Love, Brenda. Okay, and I'll close by taking you to California for a few poems at the end. So this book was full of environmental grief. So I was asked by the National Park Service and the Academy of American Poets, they asked a poet in each state to write about a national park. So Bob and I were going up to on vacation to Lake Tahoe. So I got my notebook and I started writing like mad. And we were in the Coronado National Forest, and I thought, right, every day we'd take a walk. And so I finished my 12-part poem. And I told the lady, well, it's done, and it's that I chose the Coronado National Forest. And she said, oh, national forests aren't in our National Park Service. So I had to go back home, and I got out my notebooks, and I wrote a 12-part poem about the Point Reyes National Seashore, which is in the national park. And so that closes this book, and it's a book with a lot of grief, but I hope a lot of hope as well. So thank you so much for your attention tonight. I'm going to read several little pieces of this, and it starts with a walk that we take with our grandkids, and it ends with a poem with elk sex in it. So it ends on a hopeful note. This is one. And humans walked to the edge of the sand through a bank of verbena and fog. They thought they'd never get over the deaths, but they were starting to. Worry about money rested in their phones. Talk of the candidates had stalled. Some sang. Grays of objects rested in their packs. They had come to the edge with children or with friends. Big nothing quieted the crows. Wings of dried ink. The snake had gone back to the hills, to velvet and bryan grasses. It digested a mouse near its spine. Some sang. The fox went back and would never meet the snake except through the ampersand. The memory of failure failed for an hour. Some sang. The future was a cosmic particle seen once a long time ago. Those who had tried too often walked with those who had yet to try, as doubt can walk beside a radical hope. They had driven to the country, though, as a poet wrote, the country will bring us no peace. They took their children of light and flesh because the sun was the sun upon the earth. It was not toxic assets. It was not forwards or options or swaps. The sign was not ruin upon the sea, for the sea saved some. A caterpillar of maybe it was a tiger moth inched along, a few white bristles sticking up, bristles taller than the country, and Abronia latifolia's roots would not live past the country, or the blue-eyed darner and the meadow hawk with its 3 life stages. By the sea, the orb weaver rappelling beside the fleabane was bolder than the country. It didn't see underlying leverage or hedging. It didn't see collateralized debt obligations and rates, or see probably 100 trillion traded on what is called futures, while the mountain lion that has a small future took her young through the O in October. Human children rolled through the dune grasses. They had a simple laughter in the country, in sand, so much older than the country. They had a little gladness for that day, while the sign, the shadow of death passed over them, but death did not. The sun paused. It was greeting the soul of the day. The shadows gathered past money. They were cumuli and cirri. They were glaucy and grease and gray. The friends talked with their thumbs on their tiny machines, and some walked and drank, and some loved. On the mountain in summer they had seen serpentine and saw it again today. Black-green, not the color of money, as if the serpent had slid beneath the birth of the sea and brought the burned waves to the rock. The friends had violence in them, and they had silence too. By the waves, the silence sounded like or it sounded like or even. Lichen hung in hashtags, and the wind was braver than sports. Slowly they forgot the grief opening of this book, and when they saw the secret serpentine, they knew that what could be both you and not you, that snake and fox and word could live with the hooded, the ring-necked, the marbled, and the blue. In spring, when the field starts to think and the invisibles are relaxed, the sounds let themselves out to the left. Crows and apples sanction their appeal, and the humans go out almost to the point and see the baby elk that have fuzzy fur on the horns, grasses through which other grasses push, yellow mustard flowers like paintings in Europe. The elk are standing out at the precipice, past dread or Thursdays, and the humans start to feel pleasure. Some humans don't want elk on their land and put up signs with poems. Let's protect both elk and cow. Time to build elk fences now. Humans want to have sex anytime they want, but they don't want the elk to have sex anytime, and accuse male elk of drinking water before sex. Even humans who might take property from humans in other countries think male elk are being unreasonable for drinking water. But the humans love beauty and can be released from their positions because so many have doubts about what is called the natural world. Far below, the sea lions are stretched out like rug samples, and the humans tarry, looking down at high waves crashing, green with its leader into gray, crashing over what is lost. The humans name what is lost while going home, where they live in violence and hope and inconceivable longing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reading, Brenda. Now we're going to show the animation that Nate Milton has done of Brenda's poem, Species Prepared to Exist After Money.
Species prepare to exist after money. Turns out bacteria communicate in color. They warn each other in teal or celadon, and humans assign meaning to this, saying they are distressed or full of longing. The wood rat makes a nest of H's. It hoards the 7 tiny silences. Crows in the pine can count specific faces like writers who feel their art has been ignored. My father spent his life thinking about money, though he knew it causes most of this stupid violence. And he thought of me as a sensible person. You have the chemical for sensible, he said. There was no tragedy between us, unlike how poor Joyce wrote that his daughter turned away from that battered cabman's face the world. I didn't turn away because I don't know where it is. It is all over. And when it seems pure nothingness has come to pass, I know another animal prepares itself, nationless, not sensible. Thinking of it helps a little bit.